Hi, everybody. How are you doing today? Wherever you are, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Rochester in mid July. Um, when I said mid July, I realized that I'm recording this on July 15th, and it was 1 year ago today that I had my surgery. So, thank you to those of you who have prayed me through that and are still praying for my healing. Not that I don't want your prayers anymore, but it's a little less urgent perhaps than they were needed a year ago. At any rate, I'm mindful today of change. Not just change in my own body, change in our culture, change in politics, changes in our country, changes in churches. And many of you know that through our nonprofit Firebird Spirit, we do consulting with churches across the country when they are in transition. One of the books that has been seminal in this area of work, not just with churches, but with businesses and organizations in general, is this one. It's making the most of change and transitions, managing transitions, and how we make the most of change by William Bridges and Susan Bridges. Been around for years. I want to read you different excerpts from it today because what we're facing right now, many of us is an increasing pace of change and transition. Change after change after change after change, and it's a lot. And, many of us deal with these changes without even thinking about them. Some others kind of rise up and we do think about them. They're momentous changes, maybe changing where we live, changing the household makeup if children are leaving, or if adult children are returning, or grandchildren, whatever it is. If a spouse dies or if we find someone new to live with. I mean, there's just a lot of change. And that's just in our personal lives, not even counting those earlier, the things I said earlier about society and culture and church and so forth. But chapter 7 in this book is titled How to Deal with Nonstop Change. And I admit that I consult this book regularly. Well, a little less so now because so much of it has become integrated that it just feels, it's like I naturally kind of feel led to do what this book would suggest after years and years of working with it, which pleases me to know I've integrated all of that. But I just want to quote some things from here and see if we can find ways to help ourselves get through all of the changes that are happening around us. And I don't expect to be able to highlight everything that I want to. So I'm going to set a clock going for me there so I can not run too long and maybe make this into a 2-day presentation on really how to deal with nonstop change. One of the things that the Bridges, plural, point out is that really today the only constant is change. And yet we all feel that change is different today. It's continuous, it's nonstop, and increasingly complex. I think we'd all agree with that. Now they have presented over the years, you've probably seen this many places. Let me get it so you can see it. This understanding of how change works. That time moves from left to right in this, and that what was there is ending. There's a sense of losing and letting go. And there's some of the new beginning that we can begin to sense. But that for a long time there, we're kind of in a neutral zone. We're not where we were, and we are not yet where we are going to be. It's like we have to, I liken it to a child learning to walk. And you know how they stand there, the toddler stands there holding on back here while reaching out over here. And ultimately they're going to have to let go back there, and they won't yet have reached anything over here. And they're in that teetering, tottering toddler stage. learning to move into what's new. That's where many of us are, in this neutral zone that's between the two. We've let go, or we're in the process of letting go of the way things used to be, but we're not yet where things are going to end up. I think of that in terms of our country. We have let go, many of us, and you'll notice that none of these is a straight line, right? They're all gradual and they're plateaued, and they overlap. I think of it, musicians think of it as a crescendo at the same time that something else is decrescendoing. Well, we're in the middle there. We have let go, most of us, many of us, nationally, of this sense that everything was okay forever in terms of racial equality in this country. But we are not yet to the new place of knowing how that's going to be. And the first thing we need to do, this book says, I'm reading here, the first thing you're going to need in order to handle nonstop organizational change is an overall design within which the various and separate changes are integrated as component elements. So one of the overall designs, for instance, could be racial equality, living up to the values we say we have. That would be the overarching design of this change we're going through. In terms of churches, it could be reestablishing our mission, whatever that is. For South Church, it happens, their mission statement is, go out and train everyone you meet in my way of life, which is the Message version of Jesus' Great Commission. It's found in Matthew 28:19. So whatever the overarching thing is, keep in mind what that is. And then I liked this. It says, because whether we're talking organization or my life, your life, put it on any scale you want, it may be helpful to think of your organization's history as a life history, and to think of the present as the crossover point between one chapter and another in the history of that life. Imagine what names you would give to those chapters, and the movement from the former to the latter, which will probably give you a clearer picture of the overarching change that your organization is going through at present. I think of my life, for instance, and I do see it as chapters of my life. There was a chapter when I lived at home with my parents. There's a chapter of college. There's a chapter of beginning as a professional, a chapter of forming a family, a chapter, each one of these. And I'm entering the new chapter probably in the next month, where my daughter moves out of the house. Now, is that the first time we've been in this chapter? No. And she's older. She's not 17, like the first time she went away to college. But because of COVID and other things, she has been back here, and that's changed. That's been its own chapter. For many of us, I think COVID has been our own chapter. And so how do we move out of that, and how do we do it intentionally? He suggests that one thing that's helpful is to see the life in the larger term, to see a larger picture of our lives, and to remember that there's a tremendous human capacity to adjust to new and higher levels of change, and that's what's happening now, is that we're dealing with change after change after change. So the book suggests, and I've done this with the church, one of the changes South Church is facing is a return to in-person worship at one of our acts of faith, though not at the other three worshiping acts of faith, new worshiping communities. One of them is ready to start up, the other three are not. And one thing that they say, is that we can postpone or sometimes cancel incidental changes that are unrelated to the larger shift that you're trying to make. So one thing we're doing, for instance, is that because we have had to shift the time of our worship service from 10:45 to 1 p.m., so our regular worship will be at 1 p.m. on Sundays at St. John's Meadows. Our community, the community that lives in the larger world too, these are not just residents of that senior living community, but of the larger community as well, who worship with us, everything changes to 1 o'clock. That's a huge shift. And so one of the things that we are not trying to do is to continue the coffee hour initially. That can come back after a month or after we get settled. Because it's at 1 o'clock, we don't feel a need to, have dessert or have a meal or a pre-meal meal. And we need to kind of go slowly to figure out what's going to work and what isn't, because we can consciously say, oh, that's just changing the clock. It is a huge change whenever a community changes the time for something like that. It was a huge change just to go from 10 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. when we did that a few years ago. So postpone the extra changes, the things you don't have to do. Another thing he suggests is that we foresee as many things as we can. And in so doing, to work out worst case scenarios. Well, what's the worst that can happen? And, how will we go forward with that? I'm going to stop there with the book for now, because let's talk about this in terms of you and your spirituality. With so much that is changing around you, what can you look at from your past life, not past lives, but earlier in this life? What can you look at that would inform you and give you ideas about how to move forward during whatever changes you're going through now? And how can you really see that in a larger context of your life? Like, where has God been? And how would you name those times in your life and your relationship with God? Maybe look at them by decades. How did you interact with God pre-teen, or during teenage years, or in your 20s? How is that different or the same for how you interact with God or relate to the divine now in your life? And really get clear on the fact that this has been a long-term relationship. Whether you've been close in the relationship or apart in the relationship, it is a long-time association, you and God. And so whatever you're going through now is a part of that, but it's not all that there is to that, right? Don't take on any extra changes that you need to right now. Just stay focused on, all right, here's what I need in order to feel the most comfort and support. Maybe it's worshiping. Maybe it's these things, a prayerful pause of the pastor. Maybe it's reading scripture or studying scripture, whatever it is. Focus in on those and let go of the extraneous. And remember that we are really good at changing, and that although Bridges don't talk about this, we know that it's the Spirit that gets us through these changes, that walks with us all the time. I think that's a lot for today. You might want to replay this so that you can hear it again and think about your own life in terms of your spirituality and where you're at right now, with so many things changing around you. And think about it again in terms of our country, or about the church in general, or your church congregation. But we're going to leave it there at the end of part 1 of our 2-part discussion of how do we stay afloat when things are changing so quickly around us. Thanks for joining me for this prayerful pause of the pastor, a time to think of something greater than ourselves. In this case, the beginning thoughts about changing and staying afloat. All right. I'm Pastor Deb Swift of South Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, God bless, take care, and bye for now.